Ben here with the PointByPatrol. Today on this beautiful Boost Blue car, this is a friend of mine, we're going to be installing the HEL Performance stainless steel brake lines all around the car. We're also going to be bleeding the brakes. A lot of you guys have asked for a video on how to bleed the brakes, so unfortunately you'll have to suffer through what it looks like to install lines unless you want to fast forward through that, but we'll also get detailed about what we need to do to bleed the brakes. So what we have here is Castrol SRF. I highly recommend this. I've managed to fade Motul 600 as well as Motul 660. Motul 700 is incredibly expensive and you need several bottles of it in order to do a proper bleed on the car. This is actually more cost effective. We are going to use 2 bottles today since we have brand new lines on here and we're going to be introducing a whole lot of air into the system. And we also just want to make sure that we get all the factory fluid out. So this is overkill. This is more fluid than we actually need, but for the initial bleed, I recommend going with 2. When you bleed in the future from there, you can just buy 1 bottle. I think you'll find that 1 bottle is cheaper than most other Motul solutions because this has twice the capacity in 1 bottle as 1 bottle of Motul. Another thing to focus on here is wet and dry boiling point. Dry boiling point is the boiling point of this brake fluid sealed inside of this bottle, which is 590 degrees Fahrenheit for the Castrol SRF. The wet boiling point is after moisture has gotten inside of the brake fluid, since brake fluid is hygroscopic. And the wet boiling point on this fluid is 518 degrees. So there's not actually a huge difference between the wet and dry boiling point on Castrol SRF. Castrol SRF is also a synthetic .3, .4. What they've done here is they've taken the best qualities from both fluids and engineered a go-to fluid that works perfectly for racing. So the 518 degree Fahrenheit wet boiling point that we're seeing here is factoring that there is a 3.7% moisture content. That's not going to be the case when I crack this bottle open and we go to bleed the fluid here. We will lose the 590 dry boiling point, but you're only going to lose a little bit of that. We may drop down to say 580 degrees once this caps off and it's in the car. Now over time it does degrade. I do recommend flushing out Castrol SRF once per year. This is also great because with Motul you have to flush it once per track day. So I can do an entire year worth of track days and it's a whole lot cheaper because I'm using a superior product. Let's go ahead and get started on that now. All right, so step 1, I'm gonna go ahead and crack this loose. Pull your bolt out, make sure that you remove all the washers. You don't want to have a washer in the way when you're trying to install the new line. We're going to let this hang here for now. It will drip some fluid in the meantime, which is perfectly okay. Make sure that you have lots of gloves because once this hits your gloves, it gets very slick. Next, we're going to move on to the hard connection where it meets the soft line here. And it's kind of difficult to show in this orientation, but what you're going to want to do with these is a very quick jerk to get them loose, like so that you don't bend the bracket. If you sit there and apply steady pressure, you risk bending that bracket before you actually break this line loose. So go ahead, just work this out. It's going to drip fluid. Once it does, it will get slick, so make sure you have extra gloves to ensure that once your gloves get slick, you can change them out for a fresh pair. So we can kind of set this aside or just even leave it there for now. The next step is to get a flathead screwdriver, and you're going to want to work this back and forth as far as it will go. If you have a larger bladed flathead, that'll work. The one that I'm using is not a very large blade. If you have a large blade, you can actually walk the whole thing off. What I'm going to have to end up doing is using a pair of pliers to walk it the rest of the way. So I'm going to grab, and there we are. Now we've already done the other side of the car, and this was stuck. If it does get stuck, you can use a very small hammer and just give it a tap on the top here. One thing of note that you'll need to see is that it's D-shaped. So you have a flat spot and a round spot, and that matches inside of this, and it helps keep the line steady. So this line is almost ready to remove. There's just one 12mm bolt bracket that's holding it to the bottom of the suspension. All right, so you're going to remove this 12mm bolt here and reserve the bolt for later use. Now we're operating on a 2-post lift. You may be doing this in your driveway, but something important to note is it is currently dripping brake fluid. Brake fluid's pretty corrosive. Doesn't really matter if it hits your skin, because you can go wash it off, but it can damage your clothing. So it is actively dripping right now, and just you want to make sure that you're staying far enough away when you're accessing this bolt that you're not getting brake fluid all over clothes that you may care about. I'm going to go ahead and remove the line, and the line is out. This is the HEL Performance line. You can see that there's a flat spot here. You can also see that there's a hex here on the bottom. This hex is important. You cannot tighten your brake line without holding this hex steady, or else this will rotate inside of the bracket that it goes in. So we're going to start by fishing this back through where it came from on the old line. I'm going to line up the D shape there, and I'm going to try to start threading this in. There, the threads have started. What I'm going to do next is install my bracket. The easy way to do this, I've already kind of pushed it on with my strength. I'm going to use this same flathead screwdriver and a small hammer, and I'm just going to gently tap this into place like that until it fully seats. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab an adjustable wrench, and I'm going to fit it to the size of this lower hex as best I can. And then 10mm line wrench, and this is just, this part's, it's not tedious, it just takes time. You're going to sit there and you're going to tighten this. Putting a little light on this, I want you to note this is fully tightened now. I went ahead and tightened it down. This is about how much thread remains on this, and it is fully tight. Now, something that you are going to want to do over the next few days is just to check all of your lines to make sure that there's no leaks and that they're secure. I've never had an issue, but it's very important anyways just to keep an eye on your brake lines to make sure that maybe it needs to be a little bit tighter, maybe it's not quite tight enough. I've snugged this down about as hard as I was comfortable with. So again, check your lines over the next few days, really pay attention to your pedal pressure, and check your lines before you even get in the car to drive it, just to make sure that you don't have any kind of leaks. Very important, this bolt was supplied with the kit. You need to make sure that you have your copper crush washer on both sides, and the way that you do this is you want to have this portion bending this direction. So these lines can be very stiff. They will soften up over time and kind of just take on their shape, but you may have to fight it a little bit just to get this to begin threading. Be gentle, there's no reason to be overly rough about it. So as I can tell there, this is threaded, and I'm able to screw this down by hand. I'm going to stop right about there. So now I'm going to use a 14 wrench to tighten this the rest of the way. Now once this starts to get tight, you need to make sure with your fingers here that you have adequate room between the back of the electronic e-brake and your bleeder. So I'm going to kind of hold my finger here as I tighten to hold the line in place. And you want to be able to feel the crush washers crush. And you'll feel a small slip, and then it'll tighten up. And that's really all of the pressure that you need to add. You don't need to add any more than that, or else you might risk stripping out your caliper, which is something that you certainly do not want to do. Last thing on the list here is to tighten the bracket that holds everything here in place, and we'll do that now. Last step, and I've started this by hand, it's just to tighten it down, and you're done. Guys, so I wasn't satisfied with how this line was running. It was looking like it was running into a couple things here on the back, and I didn't want it to rub. So if that occurs, and what we've learned here, best place to start is actually from this bolt here. So if you want to go ahead and tighten that down and then run your line back so that you can have the line run in a nice arc over without rubbing against anything, do it that way. So lesson learned kind of as we're going. Last step is just to kind of clean up any stray brake fluid. Again, it's very corrosive. and you don't want it eating the paint off of your nice red calipers. So we're going to call this corner done, and we're going to move on to the front. One important thing on these, just making sure that the steering wheel doesn't lock. We have the car in accessory mode. You want to be able to turn, and it can be difficult, but you want to be able to turn this on both sides when you're doing the lines so that you get better access on the inside here. Because the only places that you're really going to be working on, this bolt, you got a bolt back here, you got this bolt here, and then you have your brake line coming down hard line to soft line, and we're replacing the soft lines with hard stainless lines. So we'll go ahead and get started on this, and should only be a couple minutes, and we'll have this ready to go. Then it'll be time to bleed the brakes. Start here. Reserve your bolts. We're just going to set these to the side. They're both the same exact size, so if you get them mixed up, it's not a big deal at all. We also need to pull the ABS sensor here off of its little tang. And the way to do that, you just kind of work it up gently, roll it kind of in your hands, and it pops out just like this. And then we're going to go ahead and crack this loose up here. 10mm line wrench. Again, you're going to want a kind of swift movement like that to break it loose. So that keeps everything happy. It keeps your bracket from bending. I'd imagine these brackets are probably not a whole lot of fun to bend back in shape. So again, you want to have kind of a swift movement with that to crack it loose. It really keeps it from upsetting too much other stuff. You're just giving it basically instant torque faster than it's ready for, and it just cracks loose nice and easily. So. All right, so that's slid up. That's loose now. We're going to go after our collar pin here. I managed to get that clip out. It took me a few tries and just didn't want to sit here and burn up your time on camera, but either way, this is out now. We have our line loose now, but we don't have the metal line that goes to the brake caliper loose yet. So we need to go ahead and loosen that. There we go. Now in that case, we did bend the bracket a little bit, but this one's actually easy to fix just in case that happens. But either way, we have the line loose now, and I'm just going to sit here and work this off, and then we'll remove the line with the entire holding bracket. To remove the entire bracket, one 12mm bolt, and everything just comes away just like this. So set this aside. With this bracket here, it slides right off, and you'll see this pin, and this fits right here on this pin. So you're going to get your new line, and you're going to find the unthreaded hole. So this one's threaded, this one isn't. The one that isn't slides onto your pin like so. And then you need to start this hole. And one thing that I've noticed with these HEL Performance lines, they don't always line up. There is a workaround to this. Either you can get a drill bit and you can wallow out the bracket hole a little bit, or you can put it in a vise and basically make it work. But as you can see here, it is very difficult to get this guy to start. And there, we got it. We got lucky. We lucked out. We did not luck out on the other side. So we can go ahead. We're going to tighten that down. I'm not going to hit this with any kind of force until after we have the brake line installed, when we go back through and just make sure that everything's tight. But that actually worked out perfectly. I'm thrilled. We're going to go ahead and put our bracket back on. Make sure that the bracket and the ABS sensor go like so. So that's back in. Find your hole. And I know it's hard to see what I'm doing because my hands are in the way, but we need to get this bolt threaded back into the hub. All right, we have it started. Use the gun to finish it. Like that. And then our ABS sensor just presses right back into place, like so. This is going to wrap underneath. I can go ahead and start this bolt by hand. I'm not going to tighten it all the way because I do want some wiggle there. And of course, it's going to fight me. All right, that's started. Same story on these as it was on the other side. There is a D shape to this, and the D shape faces the body of the car, like that. So this will go through the hole with the D face like this. Then you get your brake line ready, and you mate them up. This may take some jiggering. As you can see, I'm kind of struggling here, but you got to get your threads started, and you want to make sure that that D face stays to the back of the car like that. And from there, you're going to get an adjustable wrench, and you're going to get your line wrench. You want this to push up. You can feel back here to make sure that the D face is staying where it's supposed to stay. That just locked in, feels good. I'm going to go ahead and hold that while I tighten this down. I've got the line tight. I just need to put the bracket back on. So flathead and a small hammer. Alright, so that's back on. Again, the line is tight. We do need to come back and secure the hard brake line that comes from the brake caliper into this block, as well as tighten this down. I'm going to wait to tighten this down until after I put this in. I've got that as far as I can go by hand. We're going to do the rest with our 10mm line wrench. And again, this just takes several turns. Okay, that's starting to snug. Now that that's starting to snug, I'm going to go ahead and tighten this bolt. And we'll finish with one. And I'm comfortable there. So everything's good to go. As I said earlier, you're going to want to check over the next couple of days to make sure that you don't have any leaks. And then the last portion of this, spray off any area with some brake clean, just to clean everything up so that you have nice and tidy work. And now we're going to bleed the brakes. Okay, so what I have here is a Mighty Vac fluid evacuator. This is what we're going to use to bleed the brakes. For the front brakes here, you're going to need an 11mm line wrench to crack these loose, and a 10mm line wrench to crack the rears loose. On the fronts here, you start with the outer closest to you. You'll bleed this through, and then you move to the inner. I've got my 11mm line wrench on. I'm going to go ahead and press on this fitting, and we're going to crack this loose. And now we have fluid bleeding through the system. And we're going to allow this to go for a little while. Just leave this here. And we're going to monitor our brake fluid level as it sucks it back. And as it sucks it back, we're going to add in the Castrol SRF. And don't be shy on this first bleed. It's okay to bleed a whole ton of fluid out. We've got 2 bottles of SRF, so we've got more than enough to do this job. Yeah, as you can see the brake fluid being pulled through. I'm gonna stop this bleeder here, and I'm gonna move to the inside now. We got plenty of fluid running through here now. You'll notice I kept the wrench on this one, and the reason being is just because it's kind of A, dark, and B, tight back there. And we're still getting a whole ton of fluid pulled through this caliper, so we're doing just fine. Again, keep a monitor on your brake fluid reservoir. You can tell that it's sucked back about half the capacity of this. You do not want to let it run dry. We're moving on to the passenger side front. I changed out my line wrench for an actual just 11 millimeter wrench. This is a little bit easier to leave this on here when I'm bleeding down so that I can have it connected the way that I want and get decent turn out of it. And we're pulling fluid. So I'm going to let that go, and I'm going to monitor the brake fluid reservoir, which is now down to about half. That's looking really good coming through there, so I'm going to go ahead and cap this side off. Move on to the inside. All right, now we got good flow coming from there, so back just keeping an eye on the brake fluid reservoir level. Let this run for about 2 minutes. Again, we've got 2 bottles of SRF, so we have more than enough to complete this job more than once, but again, we just want to make sure that we have all of the factory brake fluid out of there and nothing but SRF remaining. We're going to bleed the passenger side rear now. These are 10 millimeters. I'm going to use the open end on this. Go ahead and connect my hose fitting and whoops, do that for fun. Just kidding. Those are pretty tight. The rears like to bleed nice and slow. See, not a whole lot comes out of them. So I can go a little bit looser to try to get more coming through. And there we go. So these are going to take a little bit longer. I'd recommend probably leaving the hose on these for anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. They just don't pull down as fast as the front calipers do. So we're going to do this side, then we're going to move on to the next, and then there's an important detail that you're supposed to follow when bleeding the brakes on these. I'll detail that, and you know, soon enough we'll have this job done. Satisfied with the amount of time that we've had this on here. It only bled down about half of the bottle in 5 minutes time. Like I said, the rears are really slow and the fronts are really fast. So we'll go ahead and tighten this up. All right, and yeah, so we end here on the driver's side rear. And that is the order that it says to do it in the manual. It says to start with the driver front, passenger rear, driver's side rear. So again, we're gonna let this go for 5 minutes. Keep an eye on our brake fluid level and top it off as needed, just to make sure that the reservoir doesn't go dry. But we've got a little time to kill here just because this goes as slow as it does. With the car in the on position, we're going to actuate the parking brake 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we cut the car back off. And we move to the other side of the car. So we're gonna go to the passenger rear, and then we're gonna come back to the driver rear, so they get bled twice. We've already gone through an entire bottle of SRF, which is about expected. Luckily, we have another bottle. Again, Since we replaced the lines on this car today, we introduced a lot of air to the system. So if the brakes still don't feel good after we've actuated the parking brake and re-bled the rears, then you have to do that process twice. So if you get it in the car and the brakes just don't feel right, you need to address that again. I've got this loosened up here. It's okay if it takes a second for you to start seeing fluid, because I'm just now seeing it now, and it's been loose for several seconds before I started seeing fluid coming through. That means that you did indeed have some trapped air, and actuating the parking brake helps to get the trapped air out of the electronic parking brake mechanism. And this is the last step here. Again, if you get in the car and the brakes just don't feel right and they don't pump up right and they just simply don't feel good, then you get back in the car, you actuate the parking brake 5 more times, and then you bleed the rears in the same order, starting on the passenger side, then coming over here to the driver's side.